Hey, thanks for pressing play and tuning into the Gouge. My name is David Leslie, and based off of the last video when I was at the Veterans Park, I said I told you that I was going to be talking about something fairly controversial, but yet it hits at the home of everything that we are, not just as Americans, but as our economy. And it actually is the root of numerous other situations that we have. What am I talking about? I'm talking about the successes of Reaganomics and how the liberal agenda is using the successes of Reaganomics to attack the American people. Now, some of y'all are out there thinking, well, David, that's a stretch. It is a stretch, so you know what? Bear with me. Let me paint you the picture. You'll definitely see me looking back and forth from the camera and off. I got tons of information to pass to you. So what you don't see is you see a lot of whiteboards behind the camera with a lot of stuff out there. But you know what? Let's get into the heart of the issue. Let's rewind a little bit back to 1981 when Reagan actually took office. The U.S. economy at that time was way worse than what it was when President Obama took office. All right. The U.S. economy was coming off of 3 recessions consecutively, back to back, starting in 1962. All right. The unemployment rate was in the double digits. Now, we did see the double digits with President Obama, but when Reagan took office, the unemployment rate was at 10.8%. All right. And we had double-digit inflation during that time. CPI in 1979 was 11.3%, and in 1980 it was 3.5%. Now remember, that was 1 year before Reagan went into office. Reagan went into office in 81. Our interest rate in 1980, the year before he went into office, was at 21.5%, and the Dow lost 70% of its total value. 70% of its total value. All right, I say that twice to show the significance. From 1968 to 1982, that's when the Dow lost its value. Okay, so when Reagan actually came into office, the U.S. economy was worse than anything that President Obama had to deal with when he actually came into office. Now, a lot of us out there use the term Reaganomics because it was an experiment. It legitimately was an experiment. A lot of his ideas coming off of being a governor in California into being the president of the United States was very much an experiment. It really was. And that's where we coined the term Reaganomics. One of the biggest things that Reagan truly believed in is that he believed in the private sector. Okay? And a lot of his cabinet staff, including himself, would walk around the White House and walk around the Oval Office with little pins on their shirt that says private sector does it better. And he has a very valid point. Now, the Republican Party up into Reagan was completely catastrophic. Much of what we're seeing here today with the Republican Party that we have in power now. The Democratic Party that we have in power now that's running the Senate and running the executive branch, the Oval Office, is very liberal, very progressive. Some people would like to sit there and say it's very much a social agenda. And what they've seen is they actually seen the successes of Reaganomics. Think about this. When Reagan took office and implemented what we call Reaganomics, the very first thing he did was he completely stopped the grain embargo which Jimmy Carter put in order to punish Russia when they invaded Afghanistan. Hindsight being 2020, it was a completely horrible decision because it did more damage to us as a country agriculturally and with our business and our farmers and things of that nature agriculturally that we're actually still feeling to this day. The biggest message that it sent out is it sent out to the world that the U.S. can be unreliable when it comes to supplying the rest of the world. One of the main reasons why the grain embargo was a complete catastrophic failure is because Russia was able to get these products from other nations. Canada, Argentina, and all these other nations were actually supplying Russia with what they were losing from us. Now, Reagan is known to defeat and help create the collapse of the USSR. Now, for people to sit there and think, well, our military might, and the buildup of the military is what helped it, it's ludicrous. You can't sit there and say, well, one thing that he did is what helped the collapse of the USSR. All he did was increase our defense spending by 1%. That's all he did. So he increased our defense spending by 1% within our GDP. However, Russia increased its defense spending by 5% during that same time. So it definitely became an arms race. But to sit there and think that just because of our military might, our military spending is what helped collapse the USSR is absolutely ludicrous, because there are other things in play that a lot of people don't contribute to the argument. There's a lot of things that happen outside of the relationship with the U.S. and the relationship with Russia and our interaction with each other that a lot of people really don't bring into the equation. For example, the biggest example is that the Middle East, Saudi Arabia actually took the oil prices and opened it up to the market. What this meant was that there wasn't a steady or solid price on oil during that time. They allowed the market to dictate the up and down of the cost of oil, which did help the collapse of Russia and did actually affect it. However, if our economy wasn't strong enough during that time, then we would have never been able to maneuver and adapt to those situations. Not only did he end the grain embargo, but he also ended all the regulations. As we know today, the United States is the biggest nation and most overregulated nation in the entire world. We're also one of the most overtaxed nations in the entire world. What Reagan knew is that the deregulation actually saved consumers $100 billion per year. Deregulate the industry saved us that much money. It also helped contribute to dropping oil prices by more than 50%. Think about that. Deregulation helped save us, as consumers, helped save us, Americans, $100 billion per year, and drop the oil prices by more than 50%. His ideas, his experiments, Reaganomics itself, helped ensure that the United States had an economic growth of 92 months. 92 months without being touched by recession at all, period. Okay. The previous record was just 58 months during that time. Reagan's economic growth, Reagan's economic plan, Reaganomics, helped grow the U.S. economy by 7.1%. Obama, during his 5 years in office, hasn't even reached half that at all. Right now, the projections were, before the quarterly reports actually came out, the projections were that the U.S. economy had grown 2.8%. Well, now that we know after these quarterly projections came out that the economy actually grew 1.1% during that time. So he's not even reaching a quarter of what Reagan was actually doing. And a lot of you are sitting there thinking out there, it's like, well, David, if all that worked, how come we're not doing it now? Because the Democratic Party and the liberal agenda is actually putting politics before policy. It's absolutely putting their self-interest before the interest of the United States, okay? And it goes against what they want. Not what they want for the country, but what they want for themselves. And because there's so much information out there, I'm really hitting a lot of the bullet points. But think about this. 5 years Obama's been in office. 5. The U.S. economy has grown 1.1%. Like I said, based off of these last reports that came in off of this past quarter, January, February, March. Under the Obama administration, 19.4 million people have moved into the food stamp program. Okay? 10.4 million people are still currently unemployed. 7.8 million people have moved from full-time to part-time labor. 7.8 million. 6.7 million people have moved into the poverty line. Now, these are individuals that weren't in poverty before. So poverty now has increased by 6.7 million Americans. 3.9 million Americans are currently struggling with unemployment. Now, this is one of the biggest things, and I sit there and I love seeing it all over the news. The mainstream media loves blasting it, but they don't really tell you what the numbers actually mean. When they sit there and say, well, you know what, under Obama, unemployment has dropped. Unemployment hasn't dropped. It hasn't. What they're going off of is they're going off of the stats in which they're paying out unemployment compensation. Once you've used all your benefits, you don't get it anymore. So you actually fall off the records. You fall off their statistics. It doesn't mean that you're employed. All it means is that you're not receiving benefits anymore. So since you're not receiving benefits anymore, you fall off their statistics, and they can use that to sit there and say, well, you know what? Unemployment's going down. Unemployment isn't going down. Think about the last numbers that I just got finished telling. Under Reaganomics, his experiment, the U.S. economy grew 7.1%. 7.1%. Now, during that same time, when we had West Germany and East Germany, the economic growth under Reagan grew 7.1%. That is the entire West German economy. The U.S. grew its economy enough to envelop an extra nation. An extra nation. Think about that for a minute, okay? Because now what we're looking at is not only are we looking at 3.9 million Americans struggling with unemployment, the labor force has lost 1/3 of its actual force, of its actual labor. That in itself is the equivalent of the West German economy. So we've lost all that under Obama. The amount of manufacturing jobs that we have lost is 528,000 manufacturing jobs. Okay, that takes us back to predate. That takes the U.S. economy, U.S. manufacturing strength, all the way back to 1978. That's before Reagan even went in office. During that time, Reagan wasn't even nominated on the Republican bill yet. He was struggling just to get to that point. Okay, before he came in office in 1981. So that's just mind-boggling. It's staggering. The amount of money that you've lost, the Americans have lost, the median household income that has been lost during this time, under his 5th year in office, is $3,827. $3,827, okay? The price of gasoline has actually increased 79%. Increased. Now you're probably sitting there thinking to yourself out there with all these numbers coming at you, and you're going, whoa, David, okay. Put on the brakes for a little bit, okay? You're throwing a lot of numbers out there. I'm not understanding where you're going. The liberal agenda understands that under Reaganomics promoted the private sector. Remember when I told you that his staff and himself would walk around the Oval Office and walk around the White House with little pens saying the private sector does it better. Well, you know what? I hate to sit there and tell you, the private sector does do it better. The liberal agenda is against the private sector. Okay? During Reagan, during his era, our biggest political adversary was Russia. Remember, during that time, Russia invaded Afghanistan, something that we were completely and totally against. Hindsight being 2020, it's understandable why Russia invaded Afghanistan. It's completely mind-boggling how we're not looking at the same things while we're in Afghanistan right now. Why? Because of the natural resources, the raw material in Afghanistan is absolutely ludicrous. The value that it can bring a nation is mind-boggling. The amount of resources that they have, which is something similar to what we're seeing when the attacks in the Balkans were going on. And I sat there and told you on later episodes the amount of raw material resources that just Kosovo itself has naturally within its own country. That was the primary reason in which Russia invaded Afghanistan. It wasn't because they were technically a military threat to Russia, because obviously they weren't. It was for their natural resources, their raw materials. Some of the same things that we're seeing with Russia completely taking over Crimea and Russia moving to take over Ukraine. Anybody sitting there thinking that Russia is not going to actually make a move on Ukraine, you're not looking at the big and total picture here. And one of the reasons why we've lost so much international influence, A, because our economy is so weak, but the reason why we cannot do so much internationally, number one, is because our economy is so weak. And Europe does depend on Russia for its energy resources. By Russia taking Ukraine, they basically cut out the middleman. One of the things that they don't constantly harp on in mainstream media is the agreement that Ukraine had with Russia when it comes to actually utilizing the logistics in order to transport natural gas and raw materials and gas and oil into Europe, which Europe is actually utilizing right now. Russia supplies about 30 to 35% of the actual fuel needed for Europe, mainly Germany, but for Europe in order for them to have energy resources. So by Russia taking over Ukraine, they basically cut out the middleman, and it's more money into Russia's pocket. That was one of the things back in 1981 and on during Reagan's administration that he actually knew and saw, was the USSR collapsing already by that point in time. Yes, absolutely they were, which is one of the reasons why they were invading Afghanistan. Because because the USSR was such a dominant government-controlled nation that they were running out of money. Their economy was collapsing. Russia was actually opening up numerous banks within their country in order to draw money from and keep the books open and keep things going on. Basically, similar to what we're seeing in our own country to this day, when we have our central bank constantly printing money out in order to, what they say, keep inflation down. But it's absolutely ludicrous. Eventually, inflation is going to hit us, okay? So the liberal agenda actually saw what worked and actually seen what's happening, and now knows what they cannot do and what they can ensure doesn't happen, all right? So by utilizing this and by learning from the successes of another experiment, they're actually able to ensure that it doesn't happen here in the States. Mind you, the liberal agenda and the Democratic Party are always sitting there saying, including President Obama, are always sitting there saying, it's like, well, government's the solution. Government isn't the solution. It's not. The American people are the solution. One of the biggest things they like to sit there and throw out there is all the social work that they like to do. Just like one of the numbers I sat there and told you, and they would definitely use this in an argument. 19.4 million people actually entered the food stamp program. Well, they'll sit there and say, well, all those people entered the food stamp program. It's the federal government's responsibility to take care of them. Wrong. It's not. And they will actually use that argument to convince the American people why big government is so important. And by increasing the spending of big government under under Obama, the actual federal spending has increased dramatically. Um, when he first took office and first did that $1 trillion stimulus, he actually increased federal spending by 28%. And it's projected that by 2021, federal spending will increase another 57%. Talk about big government. Okay, talk about not looking at the example. USSR was that failed experiment, that government-controlled country. They're attempting to implement it here. Now, a lot of y'all can sit there and say, well, David, you know what? It won't happen. It is happening. It's happening right now. By attacking the private sector, by learning from the successes of Reaganomics, they now understand the avenues in which they need to take, not just to continue implementing their agenda, but to ensure that those avenues don't open back up. Think about this. Under President Obama, our now economic ranking in the world is number 12. The dollar, the strength of the dollar is now at number 4. To take a dollar and have the purchasing power of the U.S. dollar in 1980, okay, to have the same amount of purchasing power today, 2014, that was the same strength in 1980. Today, you would have to have $5.87 to equal the purchasing power of $1 in 1980. How does this affect the American people? When you weaken the purchasing power of the U.S. dollar, it causes the average American, in order to work more, they have to work more hours. Both mom and dad in the house both have to maintain a full-time career in order to maintain some level or some quality of life, a minimum quality of life. And remember when I sat there and told you, and I threw that number out there, that freaking 10.4 million people went into unemployment. 6.4 million people went into poverty. Like I said, it's got a lot of research going on. I know I'm throwing a lot of numbers out there, and I'm bringing it all together for you. Their agenda is to have big government and have small private sector. Why is that? Because their biggest political adversary, the liberal agenda, the Democratic Party, their biggest political adversary is you, the American people. Why else would Harry Reid be attempting to change the Constitution right here, right now, to actually change the rules of elections? Okay, because they know the biggest thing that they have coming up, obviously, is here in November, the 2014 elections, but long term, the 2016 elections. By changing the Constitution, by adding more amendments to the Constitution to actually change the way elections work and how political officials get elected into the federal government, it helps keep them in power. They're taking the power away from you. But by attacking the private sector and by attacking the U.S. dollar, it keeps you a slave. End of story. Like I sat there and told you earlier, to have the same amount of purchasing power right here today that was equivalent to 1980, you would have to have $5.87 to equal $1 in 1980 to have that same level of purchasing power. By weakening it, it causes you to have to work more. It causes you to have both people, both parents, mom, dad, man and man, woman and woman, however you choose in your neck of the woods, both y'all have to work more in order to maintain a quality of life. In order to do that, it keeps you silent. It keeps you silent. Right now we have the American Spring going on right now in D.C., and they're talking about how the numbers weren't what they were expecting, how they were expecting 36 million people to sit there and show up at the mall in D.C. and they're not even close. It's because people can't leave. People have financial responsibilities in their own household, so they can't leave. They have to work. They have to. So by ensuring that the purchasing power, the strength of the dollar remains weak, it keeps you silent, and it keeps them in power, and it keeps them pushing for that big government. Okay, keeps them. And look at our international influence right now. The U.S. the U.S. is right now the world's reserve. You want to sit there and ask the question, well, why is Russia getting away with what they're getting away with? Take a second and actually think which countries in the world hold in their reserve, hold the most U.S. dollars. Think about it. Guess who's sitting at number 5? Russia. Russia controls $151 billion of U.S. debt. Russia. Russia is also the 5th leading country in the amount of U.S. dollars it holds in their reserve. Guess who's their biggest ally is? China. China's sitting at number 1. China is the largest country that holds the most U.S. dollars in its natural reserves. If they dump those U.S. dollars into the open market, you think your purchasing power is bad now? Wait till they dump it into the open market. That's the type of political influence that they have over the United States. That was something that Reagan ensured didn't happen when he was in office, which is the reason why Reaganomics worked so well. And you probably sitting there thinking to yourself, well, David, it's like if it works so well, how come we're not doing it? Just got finished telling you why we're not doing it. They want big government. They are out to control you, the American people. Look at the biggest scandal that's going on right now with the VA and what's going on with the Veterans Affairs Administration. That is the largest government-controlled health care to date right now, because Obamacare really isn't going anywhere. That in itself has enough scandals already as it is. Veterans Healthcare Administration, Veterans Medical Centers all throughout the United States is the largest government-run healthcare system to date, right here, right now, and they're failing at it. Absolutely failing at it, and it's a complete black eye to the Obama administration. It's a complete black eye to the federal government right here, right now. So if they cannot, so that in itself actually goes against what they want in the form of big government. They want control. They want control over every aspect of the private sector. Okay, and their biggest fear is that knowing all this, the private sector is actually going to step up. And you sit there and think to yourself, well, we got this many people going into the food stamp programs. We got this many people going into unemployment. We have this many people falling off the labor market. Then David, we need government. No, we don't. Because during that same exact time frame when Reagan was in office, guess who stepped up? The private sector. Right here, right now, today, guess who's stepping up for our veterans? It's not the VA, it's the private sector. Just like I told you in the last video, I was astonished to sit there and see how the private sector is actually working to help veterans. Not only with my foundation and the help that they've actually provided with my foundation, but the private sector actually steps up. The private sector does it better. Absolutely does it better. And we really need to focus on the strength of the U.S. dollar. Okay? Think about some of the programs that we actually already use right here, right now. Social Security is 4.8% of our GDP. 4.8% of government spending goes to Social Security. That's $725 billion. Medicaid, is 1.8% of federal spending. That's $275 billion. Medicare is 3.2%. That's $480 billion. We also, as far as unemployment compensation, federal employees, military benefits, veterans benefits, that is 3.6% of the federal spending. That comes out to $545 billion. Non-defense spending is 4.3%. That's $646 billion. Defense spending is 4.7%. That is $700 billion. And the interest that we have to spend, that's 1.5%. The interest that we have to pay back, all right, that's 1.5%. That comes out to 227 billion. Billion with a B. All this together, all this totaled up, comes out to $3.5 trillion. 3.5 trillion. Guess how much the U.S. makes? Guess how much we make in revenue? Guess how much the federal government makes in revenue through taxes, income tax, and all everything that they have going on right now? The revenue of the federal government is 1.2 trillion. The federal government spends 2.3 trillion more than what it takes in. Okay, and the argument, which is a very, very valid argument, if you at home spend more than what you take in, can you maintain the quality of life that you have right now? The answer is no. So what makes us think the federal government can do it? They're doing it for a reason, and it's because of control. By keeping things weak, our purchasing power, the U.S. dollar's purchasing power, is so weak right now because of our national debt. Remember, right now, the national debt is at 17 trillion. The federal government only brings in 1.2 trillion each year. By the time President Obama leaves office in 2016, it is projected that the national debt would be at $21 trillion, and yet we're still bringing in 1.2 trillion. If we just pumped the brakes and just paid our national debt, it would take us over 20 years to pay it. To pay it. Just like I sat there and told you, Russia controls $151 billion in U.S. debt. China controls into the trillions. Okay. Now, obviously, the largest debtor is the United States. We actually control the most debt. But by maintaining a high level of national debt keeps the purchasing power of the dollar weak, absolutely weak. To sit there and think that the cost of materials have changed that drastically from 1981, when Ronald Reagan first entered office, to right now is absolutely ludicrous. Okay, what's caused the increase in purchase or the increase in prices is because the dollar has gotten so weak. Okay, and by having so many other nations maintaining a world reserve based off of the Asian financial crisis of 1997 and 1998, it leaves the American people open and vulnerable to those geopolitical attacks. Like I said, Russia is number 5. Number 5. They're the 5th country to hold the most U.S. dollars within their reserve. If just Russia alone, on its own, chose to empty out its reserve and put the U.S. dollar into the open market, it will cause the devaluing of the U.S. dollar beyond belief. Right now, because the Fed is printing out so much money, we are seeing a reflation of the U.S. dollar like we have never seen before in U.S. history. Under the liberal agenda, under President Obama, we have seen the growth of the federal government like we have never seen ever before in our entire life. Okay, and they are out to intimidate and scare the American people to not believe that the private sector won't step in. The private sector has stepped in. We have history. We got the numbers to prove it. You can sit there and argue how I'm putting things together, but you cannot argue the numbers. You cannot argue their agenda. Okay, the Democratic, the liberal agenda, the socialist agenda is to ensure that the U.S. economy is weak. Like I said, under one president, Ronald Reagan, the U.S. economy grew 7.1%. That was the whole economy of Western Germany. But under President Obama, it's only grown 1.1% based off of the last projections from this past quarter. 2.8% was the projection, okay? And even still, that doesn't even meet half of what Ronald Reagan did. It doesn't. Look at everything that they're doing right here, right now. Common Core is a federal funded push educational system. They're trying to push it onto our kids. One of the biggest things that they use is, well, David, it takes a village to raise a family, or it takes a village to raise a child. No, it doesn't. It takes me to raise my child. I want my child to grow under the moral values I was taught, that I was raised from by my parents and my grandparents, what they taught and instilled to me. It is my responsibility to raise my children, not theirs. But by maintaining such a weak economy and by maintaining such a weak strength in the U.S. dollar, you can't be at home with your kids. Why? Because you have to be at work. You got bills to pay. So you have to work those long hours in order to maintain whatever quality of life you have in your neck of the woods. It's control. And it's control at its finest. Absolute at its finest. Forbes did a huge report on how President Obama is actually using Reaganomics and the lessons learned from Reaganomics in order to do the exact opposite. Because like I said, the liberal agenda and the Democratic Party, their biggest political adversary is you, the taxpayer. And the only way they can keep you silent is by keeping the U.S. economy weak, by keeping the strength of the dollar weak. That is the only way they can keep you silent. And that is how they're using the successes of Reaganomics against the American people. They saw what worked. And now they're making it not work for their own agenda to maintain their power in D.C. Like I said, if that wasn't true, why is Harry Reid trying to change the U.S. Constitution to completely manipulate how elections work? They have stripped the states of its power in order to maintain their position in D.C. Why? So they have control. Think about those things for a minute. Actually let them absorb in. Big government is the biggest enemy of the American taxpayer. Big government is the biggest enemy to you. How this affects everything, all you have to do is open your front door and take a step out and look at everything. Sit down at the table where you pay your bills at and tell me I'm wrong. Think about the amount of hours you have to work consistently in order to maintain your quality of life. And the whole argument of, well, it's the 1%'s fault. Really? The 1%, the wealthy of the wealthy, it's their fault. Who pays your paychecks? Who puts the signature on your paychecks? It's the 1%. So how is it their fault? Me, if I'm looking at it objectively, I want the 1%. Why? Because they're paying my paychecks. I want them to grow because if they grow, it opens up more opportunity economically. More opportunity economically means more jobs, more growth, more ideas in the private sector. More ideas means more jobs. More growth means more jobs. All that means more competition. When we have more growth within the private sector, when our economy gets better within the private sector, then you make more money. The purchasing power of the dollar becomes greater. And to sit there and tell me that I'm wrong, how many of y'all out there, and I want y'all to comment me on this and follow me on Facebook, how many of y'all out there have been overseas? In the last 7 years, I have filled up 3 passports. 3. Do you know how much a can of Coke cost in Istanbul? I'm talking about a can, a 12-ounce can of Coke. Nothing special. It's the same kind of Coke you get at the gas station right down the street. How much a can of Coke costs in Istanbul, Turkey? You know how much it costs here? How much does it cost over there? $5 US. Because Istanbul does take the US currency as payment. It costs $5 US to buy one 12-ounce can of Coca-Cola. And you're going to argue with me that the strength of the US dollar doesn't matter? Yeah, it does. You have no idea how much one meal for one individual costs. Even though it was good, it wasn't worth the money. That is how they are maintaining control over you, the U.S. taxpayer, by destroying the private sector. The same thing that Reaganomics depended on in order to maintain growth within the U.S., they're out to destroy it to maintain big government and control. They want to sit in their offices in D.C. and maintain control. Why else are they attacking the Electoral College? Why else are they attacking the U.S. Constitution and attempting to change amendments within the U.S. Constitution? Why else are they attacking the private sector? Because it keeps you silent because you have to work more hours. You want to look at the degradation of the morals that we have socially. Well, if both parents at home are having to work more hours in order to maintain a minimum quality of life because the purchasing power of the dollar is so weak, who's at home raising your kids? It's obviously not you. And do you think you're the only one? When we see this nationwide. And that is the argument that they're using. It's a manipulation that they use to ensure that their argument for big government wins when big government is the enemy. That's how the liberal agenda is using Reaganomics to attack the American people. Think about it. Follow me on Facebook. I know I threw a lot out there, and believe me, I spent a lot of time researching all this. Okay, so follow me on Facebook, drop me a line. Obviously, you see a lot of this on YouTube. Those of y'all that are out there watching me and giving me this time, I thank you greatly. I love the comments, and I really do. And I love talking with all y'all out there on Facebook and on YouTube, and definitely listening to what y'all have to say. And a lot of y'all are already picking up on this, all right? But you know what? It's time to wake up. It really is. It's time to wake up. So drop me a line, tell me what you think. Thanks for tuning in to the Gouge. My name is David Leslie. I appreciate all y'all's hard work, and I appreciate all y'all's comments. Check out my Veterans Foundation. It's called the Tufuhunan Project. We're doing great work. Right now I'm spinning some things up in order to help out another foundation here in the DFW area that does an immense amount of good for children who have autism. It's an equestrian center, and they do some amazing work. And how this affects veterans is that they open their doors to allow veterans with PTSD to come in and work, help maintain and groom the horses, help maintain and groom the equipment that they have there. It definitely keeps their hands busy, and it helps them deal with some of the stresses that they have with PTSD, and it actually does work. Seeing them and seeing the good that they have, working not only with the horses, but working with autistic kids. They have gone through 650 autistic kids, and 67% of those kids said their first words at that equestrian center. Amazing work, amazing work. And I can't wait to get my hands deep into that fundraiser and really help them out. So I'm really looking forward to this. So check out my foundation. Again, it's the Tufuhunan Project. Those of y'all that don't know what Tufuhunan is, it means devil dog. It's a beloved nickname us Marines use towards each other. So check it out, drop me a line, and thanks for watching The Gouge.